All right, today we're going to be going through and rebuilding the carburetor on a Yamaha Tri Moto 200. Obviously, we've got this carburetor off at this time. We've got our jet kit here, our carb kit, and we do sell those, so make sure you check out our eBay store or our website to find those, or our Amazon account. Make sure and check those out. I'll put those links below. If you guys have questions or comments, make sure and leave those below as well. We've got hundreds of videos on the Yamaha three-wheelers and four-wheelers, so make sure you check those out. I appreciate any feedback I can get from you guys. I'm here to help you guys offer parts and used parts and new parts, and I want to get you the stuff that you guys need. Also, one thing I wanted to note here on this carb cleaner, we're going to be using the Gum Out Carbon Choke Cleaner. This has proven to be an excellent carb cleaner for these small carburetors. We've got very, very small orifices on these carbs. Our jets are very small ports and air passages. You want to make sure you get those cleaned out. The Gum Out Performance Jet Spray Carbon Choke Cleaner does the job. It does a very good job of it. It's got the hose that's attached to the top there. You're able just to take and clean out those ports really well. So just side note there, that's the brand that we like to use. All right, like I said, we've got this carburetor kit here. We're gonna actually go set this aside so that we don't get any kind of fuel or carbon choke cleaner on our new parts. When I go to install these, I'll show you what we're using, how to install them. But for now, I'm gonna take it out of the way so that we can clean this without getting any kind of cleaner on these parts. The main reason why we do that, there's small O-rings in here, there's a gasket right here, and if we get fuel or carbon choke cleaner on these parts, it just breaks them down somewhat. I know obviously they're used in a carburetor, so they shouldn't break down, but the gasket is not necessarily touching fuel, the O-rings are not necessarily touching fuel, so we just want to make sure that we eliminate any issues. So setting that aside, we obviously have the carburetor off. The throttle cable that comes in through this top cap here is obviously unattached from the carburetor at this time. So I'm going to show you what happens when you pull this cap off. And typically, if your carburetor is still on the four-wheeler or the three-wheeler, you're going to, when you pull this cap off there, all of this is going to come together. It's not going to let me do that very well. So this is all going to stay together because your throttle cable runs down through the spring, through the rubber gasket that's out top, goes all the way down and goes into that port there. Now, to remove your cable, what I like to do is take and push this down as far as I can, and then take and pull this spring up as far as I can. Now we're going to take and push that cable down. It's going to take and pull it out of that little groove right there that it's in. Take that ball of the cable, slide it all the way up. It's all going to come out together through that little hole there. We can take, and now that's disconnected. Now the slide is off. Now what we can do, because we are going to replace this needle, if your four-wheeler just needs a carb clean, you don't necessarily have to replace the needle, but I wanted to show you how to do that. Pull this pin here, this little spring here that holds everything together, and there's the clip there. All right, now we're going to take our clip, set it aside there. Okay, now we've got our needle that's able to come out. There's our needle there. There's a small plastic washer underneath of our clip. Typically, your clip is going to be in the center there, unless you've got performance parts on this machine. You can just assume that it's going to be in the center. What that's doing, and I'll show you a little bit later when we get down into this carburetor, when you're full throttle, that clip or this needle is all the way up, allowing the most amount of fuel to run through your main jet. So I'll show you that here in a little bit. But there's your slide. Inspect it, make sure it's in good condition. I'm going to drop our needle back down there. To replace your needle, obviously take this one out, grab your clips that's in your carb kit, stick it back into the place that it needs to be, and that's how you replace it. Pretty easy job. Now, replacing the spring again, just set it down in there. You can use your pinky if it's small enough, slide it down in there. That holds the needle in. Now that needle's not going anywhere. So, done with that for now. Now we're going to flip this carburetor over. Before we do that, I want to show you here, this is your idle adjust. Now in our carb kit, you will get an idle adjust screw. Might look slightly different than yours, not a big deal. Should come with a spring as well as a washer, and I'll start dumping some of these parts out now. Okay, there's the parts in our carb kit. Oops, forgot the gasket. Most important part here probably. There's our gasket. So if you're removing your idle adjust, unscrew this, not a tough deal. take it, unscrew it. You don't really have to pay attention to where this is at because you're gonna reset this. Okay, we've got a spring, we've got a small O-ring here. So for our new one, we've got our spring here, we've got our O-ring in here. So we can take and replace that O-ring. All right, so we've got this O-ring, we've got the O-ring that's gonna slide on top of here. That just seals off your air from getting in through your idle adjust. So you can screw that back in. I'm actually gonna wait a little bit before I screw that back in because I wanna get it clean first. So we're gonna set this aside. Our spring's already on there, our O-ring's already on there. Our old one, don't get these mixed up. They don't look alike, but you do wanna set these aside. And now what we're gonna do is pull our bottom bowl here. So 4 Phillips screws, pretty easy to pull. They typically should not be super tight. If they are going back together, you don't need to retorque them down as tight as they maybe were. So your gasket should seal things up properly. You shouldn't have any fuel leaking out of there. Your screws are not gonna seal it up. It's your gasket. So don't try to just crank down your screws. That's gonna make it very difficult the next time you go to clean your carburetor to pull these out of here. So while it's on the machine, you can actually take and drain the fuel out of your bottom bowl here. Obviously your carburetor is going to be sitting up like this. You've got a screw right here, a Phillips or a flathead. You can remove that a couple turns and you're going to have fuel starting to dump out this bottom nipple here. It's good to have a fuel hose hooked up to this bottom nipple so that that fuel isn't draining directly onto your crankcase. Discolors it. Potential for starting a fire. You just want to make sure to get that fuel down underneath your machine, not directly on top of your crankcase. Now your bowl's ready to come off of here. If it doesn't just slide off, like this one's pretty easy, you can just tap on it like that. A lot of times that'll allow you to kind of break that gasket free a little bit, and then you're able just to remove that bowl there. Now for this bowl, you can take and just remove this paper gasket. Pretty easy to do if it sticks to your actual bowl there. You can take a razor blade and clean it up really good. Pretty easy to do. Just take and clean that up. Same thing over here. Typically they stick to your bowl, not necessarily your carburetor body. So just keep that in mind. Here's a plastic cup here. I'm going to set that aside. This doesn't typically come with your carb kit. Sometimes there's a lot of machines that actually don't have these in there. Not a huge deal. I don't fully understand the purpose of these plastic washers, kind of a keeper there, but they're in a lot of machines from the factory. Again, not totally sure the purpose. You can leave comments below if you know what the purpose is. I would like to hear some feedback there. Setting this aside, but before we do that, you want to make sure that this is all completely cleaned out. A lot of times dirt and debris like to sit down in this bowl here. Also that port that I was telling you about, that bottom nipple there that I was talking about that the fuel is going to drain out goes all the way down through this bottom port here. And this right here is your overflow. If your carburetor is sitting like this on your machine, if your flow gets stuck open, I'll go over this a little bit more. If your flow gets stuck open, you're going to be dumping fuel in. Instead of that fuel going straight into your cylinder or into your crankcase there, you want that fuel dumping out your overflow tube, which is here. So you want to take your carbon choke cleaner, spray it through here, make sure it comes out this port here. You also want to take compressed air, spray it through there. You're not going to damage anything. You're only going to clear out the debris. A lot of times they're pretty free and clear because fuel typically doesn't sit in those areas. It'll drain right out. So if your machine is sitting there dripping fuel constantly on the floor, it's because of your needle and seat, which is probably why you bought my carb kit in the first place, which I'm going to show you how to replace. But that fuel is going through this port here. What you don't want to do is just screw something in there to stop that fuel from dripping, because what's going to happen, that fuel is going to end up in your cylinder or in your crankcase. Not a good situation. Make sure if your carburetor is overflowing that fuel is coming out your bottom nipple there. So setting that aside, obviously clean that up really good. Now what we're going to do, you got your main jet here, we've got your pilot jet here, we've got your air fuel screw here. So let's start with your main jet. A lot of times when you pull these off, you'll actually pull your main jet holder off as well, and that seems to be the case here. So these main jet holders, which is this longer piece here, I'm going to grab a wrench and undo this. Okay, so we've got your main jet holder, we've got your main jet on the top here. I'm going to separate the two. Grab a 8mm wrench, take and turn it out just like that. Now you're able just to take and remove your main jet from your main jet holder. Now another O-ring right here. Make sure you should have a couple O-rings with this carb kit. Make sure that that gets replaced. All right, once you get that O-ring pulled off, take and slide your new one on top of there. It's going to sit right down in that groove right above those threads. There you go. Now, typically this doesn't come with the carb kit because these ports are so big. These ports are easy to clean out, and I've got a carb jet cleaning tool that I sell separately. Make sure and check those out. I'll also put a link for those below. But you want to make sure that that's all clean. Those are a big ported main jet holder. So typically your carbon choke cleaner, your gum out carbon choke cleaner along with compressed air will clean those out really easily. Okay, now grab your main jet, make sure it looks the same. Sometimes it's got a slightly bigger head on it, slightly thicker. Not a big deal. You just want to make sure that the orifice sizes are the same. If you order our carb kit, they will be the same for your machine. Take and screw that on. Now, you don't have to tighten it down quite yet. We're going to put it on the machine or put it on the carburetor body, and then we'll tighten it down. But for now, I'm going to take and remove our pilot jet. And that's this little jet here. It sits down in this orifice a little bit farther. We can take and remove it, pull it out just like that. There is our pilot jet. And our carb kits are going to come with a pilot jet to match. Make sure, because most of the time your machine is going to have a hard time starting after a long winter, or after it's sat for any period of time, or if you've ran in the river and you've got sand in your carburetor or anything, more than likely your pilot jet is plugged up. That's going to cause your machine to not idle well. It's going to cause it not to run well. It's going to cause it not to start well. So that is typically a pilot jet problem. That is your pilot jet right there. Make sure you get one of those. Make sure you can see through it when you're looking down through the jet. 9 times out of 10, those just need replaced. They're a very, very small orifice. Any carb tool is going to be too big to clean through that orifice. So just make sure you go ahead and replace that jet. They're cheap. They're easy. They are included in our carb kit. So make sure you get that replaced. Set that old one aside. Put the new one down in there. In just a second, I'm going to pull some other parts apart before we do that. So now what we're going to do is take our pin out there that holds the float on. This is called the float. Underneath of your float is your needle and your seat, or your needle jet. Several different names for it. So pin is out. Take and slide this straight up. There is your float. This is an adjustable float. I'll show you that here in a little bit. Here's your needle. That's a rubber tip on there. You need to get that replaced. Our carb kits come with a new needle. Here is your seat. So needle and seat, or your needle valve, whatever you want to call it, is right there. To remove your needle valve, the actual valve part of it that's down there, you grab a small Phillips screwdriver. Grabbing our Phillips screwdriver here, we're going to take and loosen this little Phillips screw up, and we're going to lift this plate straight up. What that plate does is hold your valve in place. I'm going to turn it so you can see it there. So keeping that together there so we don't make sure and lose anything, we're going to take and actually just pull our valve straight up. And a lot of times, because of the O-ring on the bottom, these are a little snug to pull up and out of there, so you might have to do a little twist and a little turning. Go ahead and pull it up. You can see there, most of these, if you've got fuel that's dripping on your floor over time, or even just you shut your machine off, it continues to drip, here is going to be your problem. This gets wallered out. It gets to be the square shape. It should be round. Because of the constant wear up and down of that needle valve that looks like this, it's going to wear this out. This is a brass piece. This is aluminum. This is going to wear out. This is going to wear out, and then they won't fit right. These come with our carb kit. They look like this. So a lot of times they'll come in a separate bag from the rest of your carb kit because they don't want these getting damaged. Now, to get the new one in there, you want to make sure this is all cleaned out. Before we do that, what you want to do is take your gum out carbon choke cleaner, spray it in all your orifices here, make sure it's completely cleaned out. Take carbon choke cleaner, then take compressed air, blow through it. You also want to take carbon choke cleaner, blow through this port here. That's where your fuel comes in. It runs down this port, out your needle valve that we just removed, into your carburetor. You're going to give it throttle. Your needle's going to come up. Your fuel is going to go up through this port here, up into your venturi of your carburetor. That fuel is going to get shot or sucked into your motor because of the air flowing through here. That is what is going to make your machine run. You want to make sure that all these ports are cleaned out. Some of these are fuel, some of these are air, and you need those ports cleaned out. Take carbon choke cleaner, spray it down through here. Take compressed air, spray it down in these ports, and make sure that those passageways are completely cleaned out. So going back together then, after we're sure that all these areas are clean, you're going to grab your valve, which is here. You're going to put that down into place. Now, if you're having a hard time getting that in there, it's okay to take a little bit of WD-40, put it on the outside there. You don't want to get too much because you don't want that WD-40 in your fuel. Take and slide that down. Okay, a little bit of penetrating oil on there, and it really doesn't take much. I'm actually just taking the hose, what was in the hose there, kind of putting a little bit on there so you can slide it down in there. Now, it should just push down in there. Make sure that it's straight. Most of the time, this plate here is going to straighten things up if it's not straight already. Take and set that down. Again, making sure you don't damage that brass fitting because they're pretty easily damaged. Just because they're brass, you don't want to take your screwdriver slide off and smack that needle valve because you don't want to damage that. So snug that up. Again, small screw going into a aluminum body. You don't want to damage anything. Now, your new one is typically, most of the carb kits that we sell don't have the rubber tip anymore, which is okay. There's nothing wrong with that because this machine is probably going to be mid 80s to mid 90s, and a lot of times the carb kits will come with an aluminum needle here, and it will not have a rubber tip on there. Not a bad thing because these typically wear out over time. These will occasionally wear out over time, but because it's aluminum, it just lasts a lot longer. These have a tendency to dry up. Then you start using them, they get beat up, they start chipping, they start breaking. These aluminum tipped needles work great. There's no issues with them there. Now, what I like to do then is take and slide that on top on the groove of your float and take and set that down into place there. Again, trying not to damage it. Take your pin there, slide it through. You don't want to force it. What I should have mentioned earlier, if you're having a hard time getting that pin out, what you don't want to do is take a sledgehammer and a pick, set it right here and slam on that pin. What you're going to do is break these posts off there. You may as well throw your carburetor away. Go to our eBay store. We've got plenty of these carburetors available. But just don't break these posts off there. They're not replaceable. Next thing you're going to do, grab your main jet holder, slide that down into place. You're also going to take and grab your pilot jet, slide that down into place. Grab the appropriate screwdriver for the job. So larger head, flat screwdriver. Screw this down. Make sure it's snug. That O-ring is going to seal it up properly. What I see a lot of times is customers will have issues after they've done a carb clean. It's a lot of times because they haven't gotten these jets tight and they take and work themselves out. Now, I'm not telling you that so you'll go and crank down on these jets because you do not need to crank down there. Just make sure that they're snug. Again, you don't have to tighten them all the way down super hard. You've got an O-ring on this one that's going to help hold that into place. And on this one here, well, on both of them, they're brass jets going into aluminum body, so they do not have to be snug. Grab the appropriate size screwdriver for this one. Take and snug this pilot jet up. No certain number of turns needed on these. You just take and snug them up. Next, we're going to go to our air fuel screw. Now, before you remove this screw, what you want to do is take and count the number of turns out it was. So the way that you're going to do that is count the number of turns in you go until it's completely seated. We've got half, 1.5, 2.5, 2.5, which is about right. Typically they're between 2 and 2.5. Now we can take and remove this. There's going to be a couple parts on here that we can replace. Now again, this is kind of the same as the idle screw. Because fuel isn't technically touching these areas here, it's not something that a lot of times wears out. So there is your air fuel screw. I don't want to get these mixed up here. I'm going to slide those over. There's your air fuel screw. Down in here is going to be a spring and a washer and an O-ring. And a lot of times that O-ring will stay in place. Now, if you're going to take and remove these, you want to grab a pick with a small hook on there. You're going to take and go down through that port there. And be really careful you don't scratch up the sidewalls here. There is your washer, very small washer. and then next is going to be your O-ring. And this is going to be the one that can be damaged by removing it. And a lot of times we don't even actually replace these because they just don't go bad, and you run a greater risk of damaging this port here than you do actually your O-ring sealing. But I'm already too far gone here. I'm going to try to get it removed for you. So got it worked up there. The thing is, these are slightly bigger than this port, so they won't just fall out typically. But when you run them through an ultrasonic cleaner like we like to do, a lot of times that'll slightly shrink some of these O-rings and cause them to fall out. We are getting close here. All right, we can take and hook it with our pick, pull it up out of there just like that. Okay, now we've got our O-ring, we've got our small washer, we've got our small spring. Those will be in your carb kits that you order from us. So washer, or O-ring, washer, and there is our washer. So now going back together, the opposite order. Spring, washer, and O-ring. Those are all replaced, all good to go. Now what I like to do is take and set it up this way, then we'll take our carburetor and actually set it down on top of this. And the reason why we do that is because I don't want those parts falling off of there. And then when you're taking and screwing this down, I don't want you to be bending O-rings or washers because it fell out of place there. You want to take and snug it up all the way down. And this is where it helps to know how many turns out you were. So we'll do half a turn, 1.5, 2. And we are all set there. All right, we've got the bowl off of here, our bowl gasket, which is this, and it's just a paper gasket. A couple different ways you can do this. Set this down into the spot for it here. Make sure that it seats into place there, and it kind of sits in a groove. Again, most of the time it sticks onto the bowl here. You just want to make sure that that's all cleaned up before going back together. Before we put our bowl on, we take and set that plastic spacer there, or plastic washer, set that down in place. That shouldn't get in the way of anything. We'll take and push this down into place, and then we can grab our 4 Phillips screws, put those into place, and snug these up. All right, got that bowl tightened up there. Now, a couple last things for your choke assembly here. Plunger, spring, cap, and cable runs through all of it. Going back together, make sure that that plunger is in good condition. We do sell the plungers and the cables and the caps on our website and on our eBay. Make sure you check those out. You can take and slide that down, put that into place there. There's your choke lever there. So some models are going to be slightly different than that, but that's the way this one looks. And to replace that plunger, just scoot this spring back. You can slide it off just like that. Now getting it back on, sometimes a little bit greater challenge. And to do that, what I would do is unwrap this cable, take your fingernail, slide this spring back, and then slide that into place there. And your cable is just gonna sit in that groove there. Pretty simple. It's a lot easier to do when this cable's unwound, so I'm not gonna do it for you right now. The other thing that I wanted to show you, putting this cap back on. Again, if your cable's already through there, you do want to make sure that it is already through there if you're going to take and put this back on the machine. But there is a rubber gasket that comes with our carb kits. Make sure you replace that. It's important that that's sealed up properly. And take and put that on into place there. There's 2 ways that this slide can go down. You want to make sure that the larger area here actually is what sits on your idle adjust screw here, which we don't have in quite yet, but slide that down, and it's not gonna fit all the way down into place if that's not in the right way. What's gonna happen is, and I'll have customers email because they have this problem, wondering what's wrong with their machine. They'll put it in the wrong way. Well, then it gets held up because it can't go all the way down because your idle screw is in there. So then you start your machine with your slide open like this. You start that machine, and your machine is going to be really high RPMs because it's acting like your throttle is stuck open, which it is. So you want to make sure you get that in the right position, turn it to where it's correctly there. So it sits down. It should be shut about like that. Now our idle screw is going to turn it up or down slightly depending on where you need it, depending on riding conditions and everything else. But to start, make sure it's all the way down. Then you want to make sure your machine is warmed up before you adjust that idle. And last thing here, you want to take and replace your idle adjust, which is here, and I've showed you the order of how that goes on there. Okay, now we'll just take and screw that in, and again, we don't have to go super far quite yet until we get this on the machine, get it started up, get it warmed up, and then we can adjust it. You just want to adjust it quarter turn or so at a time. That way you're not revving that machine clear up. So that is turned in there. Should slide in and out fairly easily when you turn it. If it doesn't, maybe you've got this, I don't know what's wrong with you if it doesn't. So we'll take now, put our slide in there. Also make sure your needle goes down into your bowl area there. If it doesn't, it's gonna push everything up. You're gonna have a hard time getting your spring on there and your cap. And there is our rubber gasket there. Okay, again, that is a carb clean on a Yamaha. All right, again, that is a carb clean with our carb rebuild kit for the Yamaha. If you guys have questions or comments, make sure to leave those below. Hopefully this video has been helpful. Again, we've got these kits available on our store, on our website, and on our eBay and our Amazon. Also, check out our large amount of inventory for power sports. We've got all kinds of parts listed on eBay. Check those out. All right, we have completely gone through and cleaned and rebuilt the carburetor on this Yamaha. If you guys have questions or comments, make sure and leave those in the comment section below. Give us a thumbs up if this video has been helpful. Make sure you check out our eBay store, our Amazon store, and our website. Hundreds of parts and accessories available there, as well as these carb kits, the carb cleaning tools, and several other tools that you may need for this job. I appreciate you guys watching.